around startups is very critical to drive that transformation. And so here are some of our startups that we have invested in. We have participated in a bunch in the IPO of Pinterest, in a bunch of exits, and so if you are going to tweet today, please use the hashtag HiveData. And so today's topic is incredibly interesting. Design thinking and design approaches for innovation have often sort of relied on bringing kind of people into a room, having a lot of kind of sticky notes, and it's typically kind of has had a whole physical connotation to it. And so today's incredible panel of Chris Conrad, Bennett King, of Conrad and King, and we have worked with them across a number of companies, and someone that they have worked with from AppDynamics, which is now part of Cisco, Brian Zake. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Ravi. It's a pleasure to be here. I think Ben's going to fire up our deck. Just to set the stage, we're going to talk a little bit about what design-driven innovation means to us, just a brief overview of what that is. And then I'm going to spend a little time presenting on a topic. Ben's going to take topic for a few minutes, and then Brian's going to close us out on a third topic that we'll cover. So we're going to hit this in about 3 different chapters, and then we'll do Q&A at the end. Just a little bit about me. I worked at Microsoft and Intuit for several years, and then have been in consulting for a while. And Conrad & King's a San Diego-based organization, design firm, that helps companies make better experiences. So that's sort of the core of what we do. Ben, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Ben King. I joined Christopher about coming on 6 years ago now. Before that, I was principal researcher at Qualcomm R&D, working in IoT. We did some robotics projects, some autonomous vehicles. So we both Christopher and I think, and Brian too, we're all out of enterprise. We've all worked on these kind of bigger problems to solve, and I think that's one of the things that Conrad and King does. I know that's one of the things they do at AppDynamics. So I think that's one of the reasons we've worked with Ravi in the past. I think we all think similarly. We just bring that design to the table. Brian, I'll let you go.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Brian Zeich, and as shown on the slides, so I'm a Senior Director of Product Management at AppDynamics. We're based in the Bay Area with also offices in other parts of the world. We're in the application performance management space. And what's interesting is when I started at the company a little over 2.5 years ago, I was a lead designer, a UX designer for a major part of our product. And now I've moved over to product management, and I think this design-driven innovation is very key to what I bring to the product management area and work with my team to do. So we all believe in this very deeply at AppDynamics. Thanks so much again for being here today.
So before we landed on talking about design-driven innovation and the remote aspect of what we need to do now, I had heard a number of people say things like, well, this crisis that we're in is going to breed a lot of innovation, because that's what happens. When there's a crisis, innovation happens. Others have said, well, the necessity is the mother of all invention, right? So there's something about this crisis that makes people think, well, innovation is going to take place because of it. And I coincidentally happened upon this article written by Larry Clark. This was in Harvard Business. And the title of it was Innovation in a Time of Crisis. And I suppose what struck me was, well, why does innovation happen in a time of crisis? What are the conditions that are so unique about a crisis that causes or leads to innovation? And this guy points out four things. Uniting around purpose is one. Seeing the system differently, unfreezing the organization, and creating a bias towards action. And when I read those, I was like, well, that all sounds actually pretty familiar. This actually sounds like design thinking or design-driven innovation. These are the conditions that I think designers and people in design create when we really want to get clear on what's the need, what are the best ideas to fulfill that need, and how do we bring that to market. So that's kind of what led us to get to this point. So let me tell you what I think design-driven innovation includes. I think that it really includes an approach to new product development and product improvement that's grounded in formalizing it as a design problem. This is going to be a design problem that we're going to approach with design types of methods and thinking. There can be a tremendous amount, or needs to be a tremendous amount of clarity around the problem to solve. What are we really trying to improve is part of design-driven innovation. Who are we trying to improve it for? Who's going to benefit from this innovation or this change or this improvement? And then another aspect of design thinking, design-driven innovation, is that ideas are created collaboratively and iteratively. Collaboratively amongst the team of people who are going to be understanding the problem and solving it, and collaboratively with those who are designing for the users, the consumers, the customers, the people who are going to receive this product. So that, just wanted to kind of begin to set the stage and for what this topic's about. Ben, I think, is going to give a couple more data points now around design-driven innovation.
Yeah, I think that was a great description, Christopher. I think one of the things that we run into, especially when we're dealing with new clients, is why should I particularly care about design-driven innovation? There's a lot of resources out there on the value of becoming a design-driven company. And I just wanted to show one that came out a couple of years ago from a group called NEA. They're a venture group. There's others from the Design Management Institute. There's quite a few resources to look at. In this case, they surveyed about 800 companies, from venture capital or venture funded companies all the way up to enterprise. And they found that the most design-driven companies outperformed those that were not. So by the way they define design-driven is meaning that there was a customer-centered product process, there was design leadership that was part of the strategy, not just as part of design, and there was designers embedded with the dev process with a lower design to development ratio, so meaning they had more designers, like a 7-to-1 ratio or something like that, but I wouldn't get too caught up on that number. Two things that stand out to me from this number, or from these numbers here, is the overall improvement in customer satisfaction. And you can see also the higher customer retention. Customer success is such a big, buzzword for you to throw around. I think when you think about the design being part of that, it's important to remember. The other part of it is the lower or the faster product cycles. This usually comes from needing fewer revisions or changes post-launch. So this saves you money in the long run. So those are just numbers I wanted to share with you. Also, an example. This is from a few years ago as well. It seems weird to be given this example in this environment, but hopefully companies will come out of this and we'll have some better examples of how to change in kind of this new environment. But a few years back, Coinbase took a look at the market that was out there for the crypto exchange tools, and many of the tools that were out there looked much like a stock analytics tool, mainly because they were just adaptations that, and Coinbase was as well. So they took a design-driven approach to their product redesign, thinking that there were multiple user segments that they could target, and the largest being the market that was kind of new to the recreational investor or the people that didn't have much sophistication in this area. So they initiated a design-driven product development process to look at these potential users and try to examine how they might use the tool. They reworked the onboarding, their exchange, their wallet, the transfer of payments. They made them simpler, and kind of the inter-user transactions as well, assuming from the get-go that all users might be new to crypto when they started. So what happened after the redesign, it helped them capture the largest market segment of the industry, including the biggest group of casual or new investors. So all this by creating just a design-driven process allowed them to take the biggest market share and make this a more usable and approachable tool for everyone. So with that, I'll let Christopher take back over.
Yeah, so we're going to focus in this presentation on these three principles that are, again, kind of closely aligned to what happens in a time of crisis as well. So I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing now around identifying the problem and uniting around purpose. Ben will take the start holistically and focus strategically. And Brian will speak to us about overcoming process and skewing towards action. So those will be the three that we focus on. And I suppose to set this up, we're not, now that we've kind of talked a bit about design thinking, design-driven innovation, now we're focusing much more on, we can't do it like we used to do it. There's sort of a new world that we have to deal with where we can't travel as easily and go to Ravi's place in Palo Alto and all get in a conference room and talk about stuff and brainstorm ideas and prioritize things. We can't easily go to a customer site and shadow and observe people doing their work. So how are we going to do that now remotely? So that's what we're getting into next. So principle one, uniting around purpose. So let's go to the next slide. So, you know, usually we kind of start this process by saying, well, what problems are we going to try to solve for our users or for customers, so that we can start to imagine a better way, a better experience for them, whatever that may be. So that's kind of the outcome we're shooting for. And a method that we use typically is some sort of semi-structured interview. And in this case, how do we do that effectively remotely? I have used tools like Typeform and SurveyMonkey to design the interview that I want to have with someone remotely. So I may be using Zoom or WebEx or Teams or something like that to meet one-on-one with an end user to learn from them, to try to understand what their issues are. But I'm pretty, I spend time planning what is it that I want to uncover and what I want to learn. And so I'll design a survey for myself to follow the interview, and I'll be able to capture what I'm learning from that end user as we talk about things. This can become fairly interactive. It can include them maybe showing me something that they do on their computer or something that they've created within their office. So this tool is what allows me to facilitate that interview and to capture the information pretty easily. A benefit of having sort of a survey designed and ready for me to enter the data into is that I've clearly sort of outlined what I want to capture. So I begin to structure the data in a way that becomes easier for me to analyze and easier for the team to start to use as well. So this data that I'm capturing in the survey can then be shared broadly with the team, so they can access the insights and the responses to these surveys. So this is one tool that I'm using for these semi-structured interviews.
Hey, Christopher, I just wanted to jump in with a quick comment on that. So one of the main reasons that we do customer research like this, whether you call it voice of the customer or shadowing, is to understand their context of use, how they're using our products in their real life. And that's one of the things that's kind of been eliminated by us not going on site. So I think it's important to maybe just to note that when you're creating these surveys, you spend a lot more time on kind of the what, where, when, why, the context, and make sure you add that into your survey. Since we're not seeing them doing it, we're not able to collect pictures and notes about how they're using it, what workflow they're doing it with. It's important to add more of that to to the survey, so that you can see how they're using the product in real life and spend more, like you said, spend more time with the show me part.
Yeah. So after collecting lots of data that may be done in different ways through these remote semi-structured interviews, just one particular example, now you've got to start to synthesize those findings and understand the patterns that are in those observations. And so you're yeah, you're beginning to organize those observations, those problems into themes. And you're trying to create an understanding of what was seen. Sometimes this isn't just you that are making the observations. It could be the whole team that is talking to various end users or customers. So we have to bring all this data back together to make sense of it. So affinity diagramming and KJ methods are methods for synthesizing this type of data, more qualitative data from different sources. Ravi mentioned going into a room, having lots of Post-its, organizing them. Well, that's what we're able to do with a tool like Mural. So I've been able to bring data from our observations into Mural. So what you're seeing here are little Post-its that have some observation or a data point on them. And the colors may mean something different. So it could be that blue come from a certain type of user, or the yellow is maybe a certainty that took place, or maybe it's survey data. So you can use the tool to sort of color code either the data type that you're bringing in here or the user groups that you're using. And then you're able to invite your team members to group these data points together into clusters or themes of what you think are the biggest problems to go and address. So Mural's been very helpful for remotely synthesizing data. If we go to the next slide, this is aligning some of the observations or themes or findings to business or user needs, and it's a way of prioritizing. So we use a technique, a modified technique of a gap analysis, where we're looking at importance versus satisfaction, and that's what we're looking at here using a tool called Miro. And what's cool about Miro, it has templates that you can already use out of the box to help you do prioritization of problem themes or problem areas. So you can use their templates, and you can easily bring your own templates into Miro to do the prioritization exercises you and your team may be familiar with. So yeah, we're looking, in this case, we're looking at 3 different worksheets that 3 different individuals has prioritized certain attributes along this template. And so we created a template, we had the attributes, and then these people did it independently, and then we're able to show and present their prioritization with those that were included.
And I just wanted to jump in here, Christopher, as well. One of the things that we also use tools like Mural and Miro for, so there's an exercise that we use called the bullseye. And that allows us to actually invite real users of our product into a session like this. And we have a bullseye template that helps us determine things in the middle of the bullseye are like absolutely critical. As you get farther away, they're less critical, and they help us prioritize our product development process as well. So you can also extend this type of thing to external stakeholders pretty effectively.
Yeah, I have to say, like, some of these tools are fantastic. They actually make the work way easier to do than the old-fashioned way. And so I think a lot of this stuff is going to stick around as the better, as a better practice, as a best practice. So just to wrap up my section, I wanted to share 5 quick tips. So in that sort of discovery or the interviewing of customers phase, it can be helpful to actually share your questions, to display your questions to the person that you're interviewing. Sometimes the questions are lengthy, or you want to give them certain responses. If you share that question with them and they can see it on screen, it becomes easier for them to answer. You can get through the interview protocol faster sometimes if they can just see it and you talk it out. Also super convenient to share the data with your team. So I encourage people to do that. It's most of these don't require, these services don't require others to have an account to view the data. You need an account maybe to create the survey and field the survey, but not necessarily to view a report or some of the data around what's been gathered. In some of these collaborative sessions where you're synthesizing the data or prioritizing things, I encourage people to have time to work alone on organizing the data or prioritizing it, because some of the data isn't familiar to you. A lot of the data can be brought in from different people or different sources, and it's helpful to be able to spend time with the data, to be able to synthesize maybe effectively or clearly. Creating individual work areas in some of these spaces is super helpful too. Give people time to work independently on their own worksheets. It's okay for people to sit in a conference room and not have to talk. We tend to, when we gather, we want to talk a lot, but these design activities are, when done right, give people some time to work independently, do their own worksheets, gather their thoughts, and then work together. And templates, these tools, Mural and Mural have great templates, use them. And then when you feel they don't serve your purpose, go ahead and create new ones. They're easy to create either in that tool or on your own and import them into these tools. Ben, you're up next.
Okay, so from section, you follow design thinking. This is about the divergent thinking, trying to get as many ideas out as possible, and then converging on solutions that meet both your customer and business goals. So before you even do any of the things I'm going to talk about today, you would have some objectives already laid out. And so this would come from maybe some of the output that Christopher's talking about, research findings, company goals, but it could also be things like having user needs or the results of a task analysis, workflow analysis, or the jobs that people do. It depends on your process and product, so I would actually kind of tailor that yourself. There's no one way to do this, so I would think about what your objectives are. It's important to say that these methods could be used in any number of problems as well. So like any design thinking method, it could be used for product, or it could be just as successful as, creating a new onboarding process for your HR team. So it's not specifically a product tool. It's also very important to note that despite the name, these are not design only activities. And some of the stuff I'm going to talk about, they have design titles, but you get far better results when you run these with cross-functional teams. As a matter of fact, I would not run these exercises I'm talking about without having a cross-functional team, just because you'll get a much better end result. So the first one I'm going to talk about is concept creation. And this is, we've been running this remotely for several years. We have a lot of companies outside of San Diego that we work with. And this was probably the easiest one for anybody to adapt. What I'm going to be talking about is the design studio method, which has been around for quite some time. And the goal is to generate a lot of ideas in a short amount of time and then improve them using the knowledge and the skills of the entire team. This one also requires very little technology. So you can do this where everybody at home can just have a pen and paper. And then the moderator is just using something that has breakout tools. You need to break into teams. So something like Zoom breakouts. I know that probably hurts Brian to hear since he's from Cisco. Some WebEx version of that, I guess. But anyway, that's basically all it'll require. And then they just need a camera or something like that to take pictures of their sketches and kind of get them into a final format. Before the workshop, before any of these workshops or things that you're doing, you have to send out objectives and the problems you're going to work on, so people can ask questions ahead of time, understand really what they're going to be working on. And also you have to give really detailed instructions. That's one of the things I've found about remote workshops is you really have to spend time on the instructions. Make sure you send them ahead of time, let them ask questions about them, and let them know clearly what they're going to be doing. Also, I would recommend setting up communication channels, like running it in Slack and having a Dropbox folder or something similar specific for the event. So you get all that set up ahead of time. The whole exercise should be basically time boxed so that we don't fatigue participants. We don't want them to, I'll give you a layout here. You don't want the participants to, everybody's dealing with the Zoom fatigue or any number of these fatigues. So you don't want this to be a long process. You want to time box it so that it does a couple of things. One is that people don't get fatigued with it. And one is it doesn't give them time to overthink about it. You don't want them trying to think thoroughly about these. You want them to just get ideas out. This is a visual thinking exercise, so you should set the expectation up front that participants are going to be sketching. And I know that scares a lot of people, but this could be line drawings. It could be, chicken scratches, but you want them to do the visual thinking part of it. So let them know up front, and maybe even run a practice exercise ahead of time to let them try that. So the exercise starts with this kind of breakout into these smaller teams. I'd say each team in the breakout should be maybe 4 to 6 people tops. And the first 10 minutes of it is, once each team has a problem, the first 10 minutes of it is individuals kind of sketching their own ideas by themselves. They're trying to come up with as many ideas as possible. And then as soon as they're done with that, they need to get them, take a picture of them, get in the Dropbox folders so they can share them with the rest of the team. After that, they come back to the smaller group, their 4 to 6 team, and they start to review their ideas and build them up as a group. So they basically combine and critique their ideas together, and they come up with a set of elevator pitches for the best ones. So as they work together, they're going to come up with kind of what's the best the group has to offer, and then they're going to present it to the bigger presentation. And the one thing I'd also say is this: in a couple of minutes, I'm not going to be able to give you enough of what Design Studio is. It's a pretty brief introduction. So there's a ton of information out there on Design Studio. Just do a search for it. You can figure out how to run one. And it does take some practice. So I would actually practice with your team, or practice running it with friends ahead of time, just so you know about that, know how to run it. The next one is once you kind of got the ideas out there, you need a way to kind of internally assess what their viability. And this is another area where Mural really helps. As Christopher mentioned, they have a ton of templates, and the one you're seeing here is actually just a variation of a template that was already on there. And if you can, what you do is run this the same day as the Design Studio. If you want to run it, same day or same week, that's preferred, because you don't want these sketches and the ideas, they kind of go dark after a while. You kind of lose perspective of what you were trying to do or what you were trying to solve. So if you can, run it the same day. But what you're doing here is creating this kind of living document that grows for each idea. So you create a page for each idea here, which we're showing for one idea, and people can come back to it and review it, or you can review it that same day. The creators for the ideas are responsible for kind of adding their own pictures and sketches to it. Sticky notes on, these are all part of the Mural tool. Put the sticky notes on to describe what it is. And also I would create an area for critique notes for the rest of the team to kind of come and add things to it, ask questions about how things might work. It's a great thing about Mural too, is that it allows you to do kind of a question and notification. So it becomes kind of live chat board of people asking about certain elements of the idea, and then they can kind of build on that or add notes to it as they go. And the goal of this exercise is for the whole team to kind of assess the ideas based on the most important to the team or the company. So we tend to use the one we have here. We tend to use things like impact to the customer or business, and then we do things around technical feasibility or the schedule. But you should tailor this to what's important to you, which metric is most important to you. In this middle column here, you're going to see each team member should individually rate an idea based on their perception. So in this case, the team member is going to come to this column. There's 2 scores for impact in this case, with a maximum possible score of 10. And below it, you can't see it's a little, there's 2 scores for feasibility that you do the same with. Each individual team member is going to come in and take a look at this idea, and they can even discuss it live. That's why it's great to do the same day. And then they're going to give it a score with a max score of 10 on each section. And then they're going to chart it. If you go over to the 3rd column, they're actually going to chart it on there. On the x-axis, you have the impact. On the y-axis, you have feasibility. Or I'm sorry, reverse that. The voting dots are also part of a Mural. That's a tool that's in Mural, so you can pre-populate these for the team members. Then they can come in and actually place them where they've scored. So at the end of this, you basically have an idea. You have an idea board for each one of your ideas. The whole team can come back at it, and you can pretty quickly look at it and say which one of these are kind of moving to the top. Once the voting is done, you can look at it and say, well, we have a good set of ideas that we can move forward with.
Hey, Ben, can I jump in just for a second?
Go ahead.
So one of the challenges I've seen with some of these Design Studio type of workshops is that the sketch and the presentation of the sketch or the idea made sense when you heard it initially.
Yeah.
But then as time passes, you look at something like even if you go back one slide.
Yeah.
you know, this thing, you look at these hand sketches, you go, okay, well, I see some nodes and some call outs, but I kind of don't get it exactly, or I forgot. You want to talk a little bit about how you help solve that problem?
Yeah, this is actually one of those, like you mentioned, this is one of those things where the tool is actually making it easier than our job was before. I think especially if you do it the same day, that's where the notes start to populate during, like if you ran this as an exercise, you start populating those notes right away. So it's fresh in everybody's mind. You know, as they're asking questions, you can, if it's your idea, you can be writing Post-its about it. If they have add-on ideas, they can add it to the critique section. Section, but it's good to do this, like all of these exercises, you should be doing it as a team. So the person that holds the idea is the one kind of responsible for explaining it and putting the notes in there. And so they're also they're responsible for presenting it to the entire team. So that this gives you that live kind of area to grow the idea. It gives you a working board to grow it. Then if it doesn't happen the same day, it gives you that they can come and look at it over time, or team members that weren't there can look at it over time, ask you questions about it, kind of put those in there. It's all tracked in there. And then your answers are also tracked in there as well. So it lets you kind of build on this board. Whereas before we usually just had it as sketch paper or like up on a whiteboard, and you kind of lose that time, you lose the effect of the artifact over time. Like you mentioned. So that's the way we get around it with Mural. Okay, so I'll move on to the next section here. So once you've got this group of ideas laid out and put together, you have a pretty good description of what you're trying to do. It's time to get back to your customer or your user and get some input on it. So to do this, we use a remote moderated concept value testing. We've done this remotely for several years as well, and this is another one that you can do with a tool, any of the survey tools like Christopher mentioned before. And you'll basically run a live chat using what we use is the Kano model. And this is a validation research method that allows you to get product feedback from your users early in the process before you've even built anything. So all you really need is a pretty decent visualization, and this could be as simple as like a really good sketch or a wireframe. You need a pretty good description to explain it, and then you need these the kind of questions on the right there to help you chart, use the Kano model to chart the products afterwards. And what you're going to be doing is walking through with the user, going to be walking through each one, describing the product or the product feature and collecting the information. And not only do you ask these kind of questions, you're usually asking the follow-on questions as well. You know, why are they giving those answers? Get some more context around how they would use it, that type of thing. So I would also say that the Kano model, like, oh, did you have something to say, Christopher?
Yeah, that can be done moderated or unmoderated.
Yeah, that's true. We have done it unmoderated before, and then gone back to ask kind of validating questions. Like as long as you keep some information about the user and what the responses are, you can go back to them and kind of do follow-on questions if there was something that you didn't understand. So yeah, that can be completely unmoderated. Always good to like talk to the user and get some context though. Okay, so then the Kano model is just like Design Studio. I'm not going to be able to explain the Kano model in 5 minutes. So I'm going to let you guys go and do some research on it. There's tons of information out there. But I will tell you, it's a method that's been around for a long time. It was created in the early 80s. And it's been used in product marketing for years as a way to determine customer satisfaction of product features prior to building them out. So you're trying to get some information before you build them. The questions that we asked in the research allow you to basically chart the product features in 5 categories that you see here. And that helps us to define, refine, and improve the products that we make. The performance attributes that you see here are direct correlations between the satisfaction of the product and their ability to use it. So the top one here, performing, is the one that you would like to be in. And that means that it meets a high satisfaction level and it helps them do their job. Things like must-have, these are what you probably just, that while it's great to be a must-have, that's probably just something that says you should have it in your product. Attractive is also very good. It means it could be a differentiator, but attractive doesn't have kind of longevity. So something that might be attractive, for a couple of months until a competitor actually comes out and does it differently. So you need something that actually gives a high satisfaction, but also is rated with a high satisfaction, but is also helps them complete their job. So just a quick way, it comes once you do it and learn a little bit about it, there's a way to chart it. You can use something as simple as just an Excel sheet and chart the answers. And so that once you've done some internal assessing, now you've got some external assessing. This kind of gives you a good idea of where to start. It's all directional and trying to figure out what you're going to move forward with. So I'll spend a little time talking about some tips for you. So I found that running remote workshops is far more exhausting. I'm sure all of you guys have figured this out than in person. It takes a lot more effort, to certainly on my part, to read people and also keep the participants engaged. So you're going to be spending a lot more time managing the group. And so I would keep the group fairly small, keep it around 20 to 25 max. And I would also recommend having multiple sessions. If you got big teams, don't try to get everybody in one. Try to make multiple sections, but be sure that each session has a good participant mix. Make sure it's cross-functional. I would also spend more time planning, so plan your workshops so that you're spending less time talking and more time doing the breakouts and interaction. Although that kind of goes against what we're doing here, but when you're doing these kinds of exercises, you want people to be involved as soon as possible. So make sure that they get involved with their breakouts and doing the kind of the sketching or interacting first. I would also say use Slack or Teams for your communication rather than use the chat like we're using here. These interfaces are much better. Plus you also have that kind of history that will continue after the workshop. Once you've created these around a product or project, you can use them during the workshop and they just continue afterwards, which is kind of I found very beneficial. I would also say if you can use two people. When I would do this, I would one person moderating and the other person is kind of watching and managing the participants a little bit like we're doing today, like Maddie's doing today. And then set the expectations for what will be done and how you're going to do it early. Make sure you get, like I said before, get that information out there and provide detailed instructions before you ever start. So with that, I think we finished up my section, and now we're going to go on to where the rubber hits the road, and we're going to talk about getting these things into production, and Brian's going to take over from here.
Thanks, Ben. So when we're talking about these different tools that we can apply to these particular challenges, especially crossing the gap remotely. So a little bit of quick background on my company. So we used to be a startup company, and now we're a much bigger, over 2,000 people in our company. And process is something that can easily kill us even when we're not working remotely. But when we're working remotely, it also brings in new layers for us to overcome. And so I wanted to focus on overcoming process and then also how we skew toward action. So you can go to the next slide. So the first thing, so a lot of these activities that Christopher and Ben have been talking about today, when we look at how they appear in a bigger concert of product development, we could easily take a month to go do discovery process and actually go and engage all the right stakeholders in order to just get to resolution on what our solution is that we're going to end up building. And a lot can be lost in translation. And what we also find is that there are lots of these open loops that just require coordination. So instead, what we have applied is a remote version of a design sprint. Now, if you're not familiar with the design sprint, it's something that GV or Google Ventures has really introduced. And we were doing design sprints before the shelter in place was called for California and elsewhere. But now we've translated it into a remote version. Now, we believe that this is so critical in getting everybody together who is going to be vital to pulling off one of these solutions for our users. So we think that these remote design sprints really help to accelerate discovery and also allow us to take a lot of different things that would normally take weeks and actually achieve a huge swath of them in just a matter of days. So you can go to the next slide. So this is just a quick view at how we have modulated and adapted the design sprint to remote work. Sometimes you see these as 5 or 4 day activities where the whole team gets together in a room and does these types of activities. We've actually morphed this into a 3-day version. And some of the things that we've already talked about, such as the concept testing and validation, those really appear in days 1 and 2. Day 1 is all about bringing in subject matter experts through remote sessions that we might do on WebEx or Zoom, and engaging them in making sure that we're setting on the right goals. These could also be users who would presumably use what we design. And we establish the map and the sprint questions in the first day. We get into actually prototyping through that concept sketching. There are a couple instances of this on the screen here with 4-step sketching, which is going through a lot of the same things that were talked about earlier. Art museum is really that share out of the concepts. And then we decide on decisions in which ones or final options and which ones we want to go and test on day 3, which is all around testing. You can go to the next slide. Now, one of the challenges that we saw, especially with remote work, that made it difficult to pull off something like this to bring everyone together is that people needed to be fully prepared in order to step in. And what we also found is that, and I'm sure many people have found this in the days of remote work, that it actually seems like our number of meetings have increased since we started this. And so we wanted to make sure that everybody's aligned on how they could be most effective in the design sprint. And so we created a digital work kit or a design sprint kit, which we share with all of the people ahead of time. Now, this includes the user personas and key highlights, how to prepare for the design sprint. And it's one way that we found it makes it really easy for everybody to focus. And when we actually get into the design sprint, we end up applying a lot of these activities with Mural and other of these remote tools, even bringing users of our product into those sessions. You can go to the next slide. And the second part of this is how, when we actually get something that we're building as a prototype, we can skew toward action. Now, what we've begun to do at EPDA is test of our product around the clock. And we actually use a tool called Validately for this, which allows us to even share a URL to a build running an in-prototype work that we're doing. And you can see how this works, where the user can actually be invited to this, and they can go and get all the information about how to complete the task, what we're looking for, things like that. And they can actually rate and give us feedback. And this can happen completely asynchronously. And what the real opportunity here is to apply something called rapid iterative test and evaluation, or RITE testing. And this is awesome because you can actually test with some people, and in a matter of like a day or two, you can iterate, maybe add some fixes based on what they're saying in their comments. And we actually can go deploy a new build through this beta cloud build for the next day, potentially. So this allows us to really spiral in on the right solution much faster than before. You can go to the next slide.
Brian, I had a quick question, and as we go to the next slide there, or maybe this is just to get some more information from you. As you've done that, you've kind of validated, you're moving things into production. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I know we faced quite a bit, especially in an agile process, is losing sight of what our objective was, maybe from the user point of view, because we're in production. And so you guys have collected this research. You've kind of, you know what your objectives are, your user goals, your tasks. How do you keep that consistent through the production process? Like, how do you keep the user a part of that production process?
Yeah, for sure. So I think for one, it's connecting artifacts such as the user personas into these things throughout the process. And we also use a tool called Jira, if you're familiar with that. Engineering teams traditionally use that, but our entire product organization uses that as well. And that actually represents our real-time roadmap in a sense. And so we connect all those artifacts together using a custom-built Jira structure. And it represents our roadmap, and we keep that up to date as new inputs come in. So I think that it's really a central place where everybody can go for that. And I just have 5 quick tips on here. I'm not going to go through all of these just so that we can get some time for Q&A, but it's really important to set and enforce boundaries. This is something that was abundantly clear. As you saw in the design sprint, we always leave time for fun team activities because this helps people to relax and unwind as we get moving with this. And some of the inputs, I especially wanted to thank the people whose names from AppDynamics are on the screen for their inputs on this. But one of the things that also came up is it's very easy for people to feel unengaged because if we're conducting an interview or something for a design sprint, it can start to seem very one-sided. So if you help make sure that everybody has questions to ask, it helps to make sure that everybody's engaged. And for the right testing, Validately and similar tools can be used not just for prototypes that are built in code, but also for mock-ups and those concepts that Ben and Christopher had mentioned before. So keep that in mind and make sure that you build time to analyze the results and iterate. And that's what I've got.
Christopher, we lost you. You're on mute.
Let's move on to Q&A. We only have a limited time left. So these were the three topics we covered. Hopefully you learned about some interesting methods and some tools that you can use to do remote design-driven innovation. So let's do questions. Maddie, do you lead this portion?
There should be, look at the Q&A panel, Christopher.
You see that button down there?
Yeah.
Perfect. And if you just want, I can ask them, or you guys can pick which ones you feel most comfortable with.
Okay, I can. Let's start with this one at the top. How do you best foster the creative aspects of the process, which are strong when everyone is in person, bouncing off each other in a remote environment? Are there exercises you can do with the remote team to get them all in a comfortable place to collaborate?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I would mention on whenever we run a design studios, we do a quick 5-minute exercise ahead of time. There's quite a few, there's a book out there called Game Storming, which has a lot of these types of exercises, and do it with a smaller team, a smaller group. And that gets people in that kind of comfort zone of realizing this is not my normal Zoom meeting. It's not going to be a chatting meeting. We're going to interact. We're going to do something fun. So yeah, we did that in person, and we've carried it over remote.
Here's another one. How should design thinking in a B2B products account for the fact that users will more likely be remote and consuming the product in isolation? From Kamesh.
Yeah, that's an interesting, I'll take that one. So it's an interesting question. I think what we have found is, there's definitely a certain bit of changes, a set of changes that come from just being remote. And what we have found is that some of the things that were key with the environment before, we even saw that knowledge sharing was a big part of this, where people were working together. When we go visit our customers in person, we find Post-it notes and printouts that help them almost as like a getting started guide. And what's interesting with that is I think you need to start considering, if people are not in an actual physical environment, how could you help them through things like embedded help, maybe the ability to annotate things that are built into your product. And you have to ask yourself, is this something that we could see use for even after we come out of the shelter in place? So there are some specific features that we've elevated to try to bridge the gap in the remote days.
How do you coach engineers and technologists on how they can integrate design-driven innovation in Agile World, or SDLC, Software Delivery Lifecycle? This is from Eliza. I said by including them in the design activities, of which many are tightly aligned with Agile, like the right studies you were talking about, Brian.
Yeah, I think part of this too that's interesting is that you can't treat every single type of problem statement as equal in terms of how much bandwidth you need from everybody. So you have to pick and choose your battles. And what we like to do is glom together similar initiatives and then apply discovery earlier. And it might be that we have a few rounds of this discovery before we even start engineering it. And that's when we try to bring in the engineers and the technical people as early as possible, so that even if we aren't looking to code it yet, they can still be involved in shaping it.
Yeah, the one thing I'd add to that too, and Brian, you guys maybe have already done this, is we recommend to our clients, and we've done it ourselves when we're doing production, is to make sure you modify your Agile process to include time for this type of stuff. And this will, if you're doing the research or you're doing these types of workshops or the sprints, like Brian said, it's the trial and error type of thing, where you've got to see what works best for you, but you may have to modify your existing Agile process to become more design driven.
Ben, this question you might be able to answer from Rebecca. For remote data collection, could you have users video themselves during use in their own environment doing a think aloud, or get a screen share recording on their computer, iPad, phone, and examine the recordings?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I think, and the other thing, one of the simplest things that I learned over the years was what I call the laptop hug, which is they're explaining something to you and you don't understand it. You get them to turn their laptop around, like let's say it's a mobile phone or something they're working on their desk, and show you what's at their desk. So they're basically holding their laptop reverse. So I call it the laptop hug, and it's collecting the information you need. You don't have to set up a remote session or anything like that. Just tell them to reverse it. Show them what they're working on, or show them what's on their desk. In Brian's case, I think that's a great example. Is the things that are at their desk tells you a lot about their workflow, and they may have the Post-its up there. They may have those things that you need to just do something simple like, hey, can you just turn the laptop around and show me? But yeah, I would say all of that. Record every session, get their permission, record every session, try to get as many angles and get them to take, we do diary studies where they take pictures or videos. So the more you can do, the better.
Here's a question from Mohan. On a different note completely, how does design thinking change in AI-based applications, especially on things like trust, explainability, etc.?
I'll take that one real quick. I think that we are specifically providing for developing holistic ideas around trust and how we can build it, that we apply to many different projects. And I feel like there needs to be specific focus on that because it is so fundamental to design principles. But even with individual projects, we do a lot of like ML design at AppDynamics. And I think what's really important is just amplify the amount of time that you spend with understanding the human element of this. We can build features and things, but many of those can fall flat if we don't consider that. So I think that even having specific research questions going into that we focus on through these activities is really important.
Okay, I think we're out of our time, so I'll turn it back over to Maddie. Thank you, everyone, for your attention and being willing to participate. And,
Chris, there's a question which is from the audience. Are you able to share your presentation?
yes.
Yep.
So Matty will make it available. Matty, also there was a question on the recording of this session.
Yes, so the recording will be available on our YouTube channel. I've just sent it out to everyone, and I'll send it again. And we will share the slides on the event page, and I will also be able to email those out to everyone. Thank you guys for an amazing conversation. This was so useful and so interesting, and I think everyone really enjoyed this. This was awesome.
And we'd love to do a follow-on session.
Part two.
Yeah,
Yes, yes.
So,
everyone's already asking for that.
You know, maybe we could do another one on get some of those questions that they have. I think that might help for a second one. It looks like there's a few questions left over. So if you want to do another one, it might be great for us to just tackle specific questions.
I will capture those.
Yeah. So we want to thank you all, to our esteemed panelists for a great conversation, but also especially the audience for being so engaged with the 15, 20 odd questions that we got, and just kind of the energy that you brought and commitment. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
All right, thanks so much.
Bye-bye.